Is it time for the Denver Broncos to commit to having a fire sale? So yesterday's 70-20 gashing by the Miami Dolphins showed us several things about this team moving forward. It showcased that this team sorely lacks depth, and it also showcased that this team is probably 2 to 3 years away at minimum for being a competitive football team. So that bears the question, what do the Denver Broncos do moving forward? I think it's realistically time to start having conversations about the team trading away some of their more valuable assets to try to accumulate assets to build for the future, because right now the Denver Broncos are in a heap of trouble if we come over here and look at the salary cap situation. So according to Over the Cap right here, we see that the Broncos currently are the last in the NFL in salary cap space with $3,682 in available cap space. And it gets even worse in 2024 as the Broncos will be in the red. So they have currently in 2024, they're set to have negative $14.4 million. That's not good. Regardless of how you look at it, the Broncos are going to have to clear away some cap space, and they're going to have to make several tough decisions. If we come over here, there are several players that are currently on veteran deals that I realistically could see the Denver Broncos moving on from at the trade deadline on Halloween. Now, I don't necessarily see the Denver Broncos trading away all of these players at the trade deadline, but one or two definitely could make sense. And yes, I know you guys are going to freak out seeing Pat Surtain down here. There is a very strong asterisk on here. Trust me, I don't think it's going to happen, but I think we have to at least have the conversation. But again, I don't think it's going to happen. But moving on to some veteran players who are on veteran contracts that I could see the Denver Broncos potentially moving at the trade deadline. The first one that just makes too much sense, if we're being honest, is Courtland Sutton. The dude had two killer fumbles in that Miami game. He's pretty much proven that he's never going to be the same player that he was in 2019. The Broncos at this point need to cut their losses with Courtland Sutton and find a way to move on from him and his bloated whale of a contract, quite frankly. If you look over here, the Broncos, if they were to trade Courtland Sutton this year at the trade deadline, they would save $14.4 million against the salary cap. That would become the responsibility of his new team. But they would then have to take on $3.825 million in dead salary cap money. So that would mean they would have to pay Courtland Sutton that money anyway, and it would go to a player who's no longer on the team. That's what dead money means. So that's one that, in my opinion, makes just too much sense, man. I think Courtland Sutton is somebody that we need to allow to explore greener pastures, go on and see if he can carve himself a role elsewhere in the NFL. I feel like there are going to be teams out there that would be willing to trade for Courtland Sutton, especially if they feel like he could be a valuable piece for a team that's maybe on a championship run, somebody like the Buffalo Bills, if they wanted to add another weapon for Josh Allen. I don't know. There's several teams that come to mind as potential suitors for Courtland Sutton. Maybe even the Detroit Lions. They might want to add another weapon into the fold for Jared Goff. There's several different options, I feel like, for Courtland Sutton. But given his salary, I don't necessarily think the Broncos are going to fetch extraordinarily high draft capital for him. That, on top of the fact that he's kind of a little bit struggling right now as a player. So I think the Broncos might be lucky to fetch a fourth-round pick for Courtland Sutton. At this point, though, they really need to think about ways to dump that salary, and I think trading Courtland Sutton is a move that could be very heavily in the cards for the Denver Broncos. Now, moving on down here, I know some are going to freak out seeing Justin Simmons on this list, but just hear me out, Broncos country. Simmons is a really talented player. We all know that. At the same time, though, he was struggling in the early part of this season, and he's dealt with a couple of injuries. He obviously had an injury in training camp. He's had injuries over the past few years. Prior to that, he was one of the Iron Men in the NFL. He hadn't missed snaps for several consecutive years, but ever since then, man, the injury bugs have really started to bite Justin Simmons. And on top of that, the team can move off from him and they can save another $14.4 million against the salary cap, and they would only have to eat $3.75 million in dead money. Now, Simmons is one of the leaders in this locker room. I understand that this is a very divisive thing to bring up here, but I also am seeing this from the perspective that at the end of the day, the Broncos are several years away from being a truly competitive team. And with Justin Simmons, is he going to be able to still produce at the same high level that he is 2-3 years from now? And if we're being completely honest, he's already showing some subtle signs of regression. So I think the best long-term move for the Denver Broncos here would be to sell high on Justin Simmons and see what they could get for him on the trade market right now. Maybe if you're lucky, you'll get a second-round pick for him, because right now the Broncos need second-round picks. They need third-round picks. They need higher-value draft picks, and Justin Simmons could certainly net you that. So I think that the Broncos should really heavily entertain moving on from Justin Simmons, again, to clear that really high level of salary with $14.4 million. I understand that he's a beloved player in the locker room. He's a beloved player by the fan base. I love Justin Simmons to death. But at the same time, I want to do Justin Simmons right, and I want to send him somewhere where he can win a championship. And I think some team out there that needs that extra piece on defense, that extra vocal leader in the locker room, they could look towards the Denver Broncos and give us a call about Justin Simmons. I, again, know that's going to be a bit divisive, but I could realistically see it happening for sure. The next one is Randy Gregory, whose contract is surprisingly easy to get out of, man. If the team were to flip Randy Gregory right now, his new team would have to take on $14 million. The Broncos would save that $14 million, and they'd have to eat a $2.1 million dead cap penalty. I don't know if anyone's going to trade for Randy Gregory at this point. If they do, it would probably have to be a late round pick, and even then, Denver would probably have to eat some of Randy Gregory's salary. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do with Randy Gregory, because he's been a massive disappointment. He did get a sack, yes, in the Washington game, but that was a coverage sack. That wasn't Randy Gregory winning at the line of scrimmage. That was Sam Howell having nowhere to go with the ball. He held on to it for too long. Randy Gregory eventually got home, but again, that wasn't him dominating up front. We've seen way more promise from younger guys such as Nick Bonito and Jonathan Cooper, and I want to give them a more elevated role, especially Nick Bonito, man. Jonathan Cooper's already got a pretty high role, but I really want to give Nick Bonito more and more snaps, and the best way to go about that is to move on from Randy Gregory. I know that would be a much more popular move from Broncos country, and it's very similar logic actually to Courtland Sutton. I failed to mention this when we were talking about Sutton earlier, but I could see them wanting to move on from Courtland Sutton to give guys like Brandon Johnson a more elevated role in this offense. I feel like Johnson has really earned it. So the Broncos, I feel like, could have almost a diet Tim Patrick, if that makes any sense, in Brandon Johnson. He's a really good player that has a lot of untapped potential. So the Broncos may want to see what they have in some of their younger players to see if they have building blocks going into this rebuild. That's another reason why I feel like Courtland Sutton would make just too much sense for me. And then finally, we've got DJ Jones on this list. He's just been a massive, massive disappointment as a free agent signing. I've been really, really disappointed with what we've seen from DJ Jones. He's been almost a non-factor on the defensive line. He was brought in to be a run stuffer, and the Broncos' run defense has been absolute dog crap. Again, man, DJ Jones, he's just almost wasted space on this roster at this point, just in terms of what he's contributing to the team. So if the Broncos were to trade him, $10 million cap savings, $3 million in dead money. Again, probably not going to get much more than a late round pick for DJ Jones. He's been a massive disappointment ever since he signed with the Denver Broncos. The team needs to accumulate resources to rebuild that defensive line. Right now, the only piece you have headed into the future with that D-line is Zach Allen. I'm talking interior D-line. The only piece you really have moving into the future is Zach Allen. I mean, you've got some nice developmental guys in Matt Henningsen for sure, but Zach Allen's the only bona fide guy you have, and even he's been a really big disappointment, man. He's been almost a non-factor. There were concerns about that, seeing his tape from Arizona. He kind of showed a little bit of fool's gold in training camp because he was dominating in training camp, but ever since the regular season has started, Zach Allen has regressed to the same player that had the concerning film in Arizona. But I feel like the Broncos need to invest some resources into rebuilding that D-line and moving on from the older resources that are not contributing at a high level, such as DJ Jones, would definitely be the play here. If the Broncos were to trade away all 4 of these players, in theory, they would save $52.8 million against the salary cap, and they would only have to eat $12.675 million in dead cap. Now, the next thing I want to talk about here, because again, the Denver Broncos are sorely in need of draft picks. There are a couple of players who are on rookie deals right now for the team that I feel like could fetch some higher end draft capital. Jerry Jeudy is the first one. I feel like there's some team out there that maybe, just maybe, would be willing to give up like a low end first round pick for Jerry Jeudy, if not a second round pick. I know there's some offensive coordinator out there licking his lips with what he could do for Jerry Jeudy. So again, man, I feel like there's someone out there that sees Jerry Jeudy as a valuable weapon for their team. And we've heard rumors about the Patriots and the Browns being interested potentially last offseason in Jerry Jeudy. But the Browns, they sorely lack draft capital, so I don't necessarily think the Browns would be a realistic option. But maybe if the Patriots wanted to add another weapon into the fold for Mac Jones, I could see something like that. I could see, I don't know, maybe the Texans wanting to add another weapon for their young quarterback, C.J. Stroud. There are several other options out there that I feel like would have the draft capital that could potentially want to invest in more pieces for their team. And if there's like a championship caliber team out there that is feeling like, again, they're just a wide receiver away, Jerry Jeudy could be that piece. The Broncos are currently at an impasse as to if they are going to pay him long term or not. So if the Broncos view Jerry Jeudy as a piece long term in their rebuild, then they're going to want to keep him around. But otherwise, I think they could entertain trade offers for him if someone offers like a first round pick or a second round pick. Again, we really need the draft capital, and we could potentially add some further resources to our wide receiver room later on down the line. But right now, we have to rebuild on the defensive side, and this could potentially give us some draft capital to get there. And then Pat Surtain, man, I know trading away our best player on defense would definitely not please a lot of people here, but the big asterisk I have here is only if teams are willing to give up multiple first round picks, and by multiple I don't mean 2. I'm talking 3 first round picks. That is the asking price for Pat Surtain. If some team is stupid enough, or if they're in their eyes is smart enough to offer 3 first round picks for Pat Surtain, the Broncos could not refuse that, man. Those would be 3 key building blocks for this team moving into the future. Obviously, we'd have to have the right person drafting. We remember the Raiders a few years ago. They had all those first-round picks from the Khalil Mack trade, and they did virtually nothing with them. If the Broncos can get a competent GM in the building who's really great at drafting, which George Paton has been somewhat in the early rounds, but I just don't see George Paton in the fold for the future for the Denver Broncos, then I think that the Broncos should heavily entertain moving Pat Surtain. But that's something that I know a lot of people in the fan base don't want to discuss. I don't really see it happening. But if some team calls and they're like, hey, I'll give you 3 first-round picks for Pat Surtain, then the Broncos definitely need to think about doing it. Now, the other thing that we need to discuss here is, will Russell Wilson be a part of this rebuild moving forward? With Russell Wilson, he's played pretty admirably throughout the first 3 games of the season, man. He's playing at a high enough level for this team to win football games. But on the converse, this is probably the most talented team that Russell Wilson will have in Denver. And right now, this team is still several years away, again, from being a competitive football team. So right now, the Broncos really are kind of at an impasse here with Russell Wilson because of how much money they owe him. If we come over here, if Russell Wilson is cut post-June 1st next year, the Broncos will have to eat a $35 million dead cap penalty just right off the bat. I don't know if the Broncos are going to want to do that. I think, though, if they are going to move on from Russell Wilson, that's their best chance to do it. Because if we come over here and look at this little note on the bottom here, if Russ is on the roster on the 5th day of the 2024 league year, then his 2025 salary will become fully guaranteed. The contract breakdown comes from Mike Kliss. So at the end of the day, Russell Wilson, if he is on the roster headed into 2024, if he's not cut, and he could in theory be designated as a post-June 1st cut and still not be on the roster for the 5th day of the league year. It's complicated, but that's just kind of how that crap works. But again, man, this would probably be the best chance for the Broncos to move off this Russell Wilson contract if they are committed to a full-blown rebuild. I don't know what they're going to do. I really don't, man. But again, this is your best out on this deal unless you wait until 2027. So it's pretty much now or never if the Broncos are indeed going to move off from Russell Wilson, because he's not getting any younger. And again, this is probably the best team that we've got around Russell Wilson right now. So the Broncos really are at an impasse as far as what they're going to do, man. I'm really, really interested to see how they approach this as we go into the next month heading into the trade deadline. Because if the Broncos go out there and they look competitive their next few games and they actually win their next couple of games, then I could see the team maybe waiting to do something. But then, I mean, after the Bears game and after the Jets game, you've got Kansas City, the Packers, and then Kansas City again. Then that's when you have to think about the trade deadline. So the Broncos, man, they might be sitting at 2-6 by that point in time, and that's when you really need to start thinking about moving away from some of these more expensive veteran pieces. It's a tough conversation, but it's one that we're going to have probably at some point here in the near future. All right, Broncos country, do you guys feel like the team should commit to a full-blown rebuild, and do you guys feel like they should trade away pieces such as Jeudy, such as Justin Simmons, such as Pat Surtain, big names in the locker room? Drop those comments down below, guys. I would love to hear your thoughts as always. Be sure to leave a like on this video as well as subscribe and ring the bell so these videos appear in your notification feed. I would really appreciate it, guys. Those are 2 free and easy ways to show your support. Helps tell YouTube's algorithm to push us out and helps us get seen by more and more members of Broncos country just like you and me. And until next time, guys, I am your host, Gage Madrid, saying peace out.